Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on Enterprise Tech Sales podcast series. This is Shankar. I'm founder of Coot, and I'm going to be your host for this episode. In the last few episodes, we are discussing with some of the eminent GCC leaders, right? And today we have an exceptional leader, Divesh Singla. Divesh has a experience in GCC setting up and scaling, right? He has a fantastic track record, especially with healthcare, pharma, and the industries. And beyond setting up GCCs, he is a veteran from the GCC, from other aspect also. He's a founder. He was a founder of 3AA, one of the GCC advocacy firm. And I'm sure Devesh will tell more about his experience, from his own words. So I'm excited to having conversation with Devesh. I'm sure all of you will have. So welcome Devesh to our podcast.
Thank you so much, Shankar. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, in the company of yourself and your viewers. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Divesh. Divesh, I made a very small, intro about you, right? But would love to really know about, how you started your career and how you really landed in GCC when GCC itself was not a, word, right?
Mhm.
And how it really shaped.
Sure. My career started about 20 years back, Shankar. I call myself as someone who has been born and brought up in sort of a life sciences pharmaceutical industry. And what I mean by that is that my education and subsequent experience, has always been working in the pharmaceutical industry. When I started my career back in 2005, I started in a very core pharmaceutical domain as a product manager, as a brand manager for a pharmaceutical company. We are talking about the times when, it was BPO culture. So India was known as to be the BPO destination, and you had call centers and BPO centers all over the place. That was the time when the concept of knowledge process outsourcing, or KPO, was coming in. And it was a sort of a cost arbitrage kind of a model, wherein the pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and GSK, they were partnering with India-based service providers, and they were sort of setting up their operations out here for them to be able to support the enterprise operations. So because of they were paying well, it was sort of giving a lot of global exposure to people like myself who didn't have that level of global exposure. So that's where my journey, if I may use the term GCC, started, because it wasn't GCC at that point in time. These were offshore centers, these were delivery centers. So I started my career in 2006 with GSK Knowledge Center, with WNS, and there was no looking back since then, because from the 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 GSK Knowledge Center, I moved into a company called as Indigene. Once again, I was based in the US with Indigene, but responsible for setting up operations for the large pharmaceutical companies in India. I then moved into IQVIA. It was called as IMS Health at that point in time. So, worked with the leadership team to set up a large delivery center for IMS internally. Moved into Eli Lilly and Company. Once again, setting up their, now I can call GCC capabilities, because this was in 2016-17. And this entire concept of GCC started to sort of percolate in. So, throughout this journey till Eli Lilly and Company, it was all about setting up, advanced analytics, data sciences, decision sciences sort of capabilities for these large pharmaceutical companies. In my current role, I am managing the GCCs for Signet Health, which is a e-clinical research organization, technology organization, and I manage their global capability centers based out of India and Philippines. So yeah, so it has been an interesting journey with with me being part of the journey, wherein we moved from that typical cost arbitrage model, to a capacity augmentation model, to a capability augmentation model. And now I think the GCC is no more a global capability center. I think now the term is it's global competency center. So yeah, so it's been a fascinating journey so far.
Fantastic start, Divesh, right? So you mentioned, from the cost arbitrage, now innovation and various other things. So, but establishing a GCC itself is an interesting topic, right? So the company themselves, they establish it, or they work with the system integrator to establish, or they go to the third party vendor like Answer or Zeno, right, and other people to establish. Could you tell little more about what are the different models, right? I think we also say that bot model. I think could you throw more jargons, what it really means, and what could be the good model for a different kind of companies, right? So that will help if someone is watching and say that, hey, for me, what kind of model will fit?
Sure. So, in my experience, Shankar, I have been part of some of of the journeys where we have started the GCC operations. I have largely seen two models operating. The first one that I saw was a build, operate, transfer model, and this is something that I saw with IQVIA or IMS Health, wherein they built their operations with TCS, and they sort of matured it to a certain level, and then operated it with TCS for a year, year and a half, 2 years, and then they transferred it into their own operations. And then the second one is lift and shift model, and I'll speak a little bit more about it. So typically, in my experience, for the companies who are very new to offshoring, who are very new to India as a as a talent location, as an operational location, who may not have that level of experience in terms of how to offshore, let's say, whether it's India or any other country for that matter. For them, I've seen build, operate, transfer model. It reduces that initial risk by leveraging a partner's expertise, whether it's Zinov or it's on Answer or it's Accenture or Cognizant. I mean, there are multiple players out there who are providing these services. For them, it is, it's sort of risk reduction while they're learning the ropes. This also allows them for
Sorry.
knowledge. Yeah.
Since you mentioned risk reduction, Divesh, extremely son.
Yeah.
What are the risks for a company to create its own GCC in India? Is it that difficult?
It is not. It is not. See, when you are setting up a GCC, it involves setting up a company, right? So you have to incorporate a company locally. There are these compliance related aspects, statutory aspects which are involved. It is as simple, or maybe the first step could be as important as registering your entity with the ROC. It could be, okay, finding the right location for you to set up your office locations to, for example, ensuring that you have the right partner who can advise you on the different statutory aspects related to taxation, the all the different types of compliances that you need to sort of comply with, whether it's HR related, compliances as per the minimum, as per the Wages Act, or it is compliances related to financials. So I think when I talk about risk, I was referring to more of those initial risks in terms of setting up the right entity, ensuring that you have the right location strategy in place. You are not ending up in a location wherein you don't have enough talent or the right kind of talent which is relevant to your organization. And then the other thing is, it also is very important for any GCC or any organization when they're setting up their GCC operations to understand where to start with, right? What are the kind of capabilities that are the right capabilities to start with? I've seen organizations like Eli Lilly and Company or Novartis. They started with very research and development focused capabilities, very clinical research, clinical sort of capabilities, for example, medical writing, biometrics, statistics, and so on. While there are companies like BMS, Sanofi, while they started with some of the similar regulatory affairs kind of capabilities, but they very soon expanded themselves into commercial analytics, data sciences, decision sciences of kind of capabilities. So those are the kind of risks that I'm talking about. Also ensuring that you have the right people, because when you're setting up a GCC, you would want to have the right leaders who are the members of that founding setup. So it's basically setting up a new company altogether and ensuring that you're setting it up right. You have the right scale. you are looking at the right mix of work and you have the right talent, because this initial phases would define the long-term success of the GCC. So that those are the kind of risks that I was referring to when I was referring to the BOT model.
Got it, Divesh. Sorry to interrupt. Probably we can
No, no,
continue.
we are all good. And so going back to the BOT model, I think the reason a company which is new to offshoring should opt for a BOT model is also because it kind of allows the knowledge transfer to happen, right? For the full ownership. Because in my experience, I've seen most of the times when we are setting up the GCC, it's like transitioning work from your on-site locations into off-site locations or offshore locations, or transitioning work from which is currently happening with multiple partners outside of the company, transitioning that in. So that's one. The second thing is around lift and shift. So organizations with which have this kind of an experience, they typically prefer lift and shift, and that is typically done for faster integration, with the corporate entity. It is for immediate cost benefits. Although this requires strong internal capabilities. Now, we have also seen that there's another model of seeding. So the companies consider seeding for specialized functions requiring which very careful knowledge transfer. This involves moving small teams first, establishing the processes, and then scaling up. Off lately, we have seen startup business as a service, model coming in, SBU, AAS. So that works very well when you need maximum operational flexibility while you want to maintain that strategic control, essentially creating a hybrid structure with with greater autonomy. So each of these models that I'm speaking about, this kind of gets evaluated against your timeline, available expertise, cost containment, and more importantly, the long-term strategic vision for GCCs.
Sure, Divesh. I think it's good first question, right? Moving on to it, right? Uh, is it necessary for every GCC to start with a cost arbitrage and then kind of move on to the value chain of innovation, R&D, or do you see that the trend is people jumping directly into the what is it, the high-end aspect, right? I think people who bought earlier, what is it, black and white TV, and then we moved on to LED and I think, but now people now coming there, they directly go into the advanced one rather than starting. So how do you relate?
So let's stick to your example of TVs, right? The reason why people were buying black and white TVs when they were buying black and white TVs were because the color TVs, the latest technology was not available. So they were pretty much choosing from the options that were available. And why people are not buying black and white TVs today, because black and white TVs are not available anymore. And why they're buying LEDs is also because one, they have more of understanding of the technology. They may have experienced it, surrogately through someone else. So similarly, from a GCC perspective, Shankar, in my experience, I have seen most of the GCCs starting with that cost arbitrage mindset. Now, the key reason may not be cost arbitrage. They would come in, they would start with the capabilities which they are very familiar with, which they have good control on, which have very well defined processes, from an operational delivery perspective. Um, and cost arbitrage is a side effect of it. It's a byproduct of it. Now, what has changed between now in the last couple of years versus what it was 10, 15 years ago is that there are a lot of templates available for the incoming GCCs to look upon and learn from them. If I talk about life sciences, Novartis has been there on the block since last, what, 15 years, 20 years now. And similarly, we have, Eli Lilly and Company, which has been there for almost 10 years now. We have GSK, which has almost been for 20 years, in a mixed model of first in a BOT sort of a model, and now in a pure play GCC model. So when a new entrant like a BMS, comes into the company or into the country, my apologies, they have a template to sort of look upon and learn from. So BMS started their operations about 1.5 years ago, and they are about 2,000 people, if I'm not mistaken, currently. The reason they have been able to scale so well is because they have the learning from other companies to pick from, and the journey is much more faster. So if I have to answer your question directly, I would say I do believe that still the companies, they set up their operations with that cost arbitrage in mind. That is the key fundamental reason why they're starting. However, their transition to a maturity level of making their GCC operations as innovation hub is much faster than what it was. So if it took Target 10 years to move to that level, if it took Novartis to move 15 years to move to that point, I think for some of the newer GCCs it will be much shorter. They are they are experiencing the value of the talent in this country. They're experiencing the ecosystem in this country much quicker than some of the early entrants.
Sure, Divesh. So is it the primary responsibility of what kind of work you can get it from the HQ? Is it the GCC head's responsibility, or is it you need to do it in coordination with your sponsor? How does it work, Divesh? For example, you might have started with the cost arbitrage for certain work, like for accounting process or other things, but you see that you keep on telling your sponsor saying that, hey, this kind of work we can do on data analytics or in AI and other thing. So how does that process work, Devesh?
So, see, first of all, when an enterprise makes a decision to have their operations started in a GCC sort of a setup, I believe in the current days, the level of understanding that the enterprise has of what all different capabilities can be started and can be put out here in the GCCs is much more than what it was. So the level of selling, the level of internal sales that is required to be done is has come down significantly. And I'm talking about some of the big pharma, bigger organizations. Also because there is a lot of outside in sort of a perspective that is available. Because if I am starting a GCC operations in India, I would actually be meeting with a lot of my peers who already have these operations in India. So I get a lot of learning in terms of what is already happening. Now, to your question, not everyone in the enterprise is involved in this journey of setup of a GCC, right? It's a certain function. Maybe it's the financial organization, the CFO organization. It could be the CTO organization. It could be the CDO or the Chief Analytics Officer organization. So these are typically the organizations which I have seen who are responsible or which are responsible to set up operations. What happens is once you set up the operations, the internal selling is required to the functions which you are working with on a day-to-day basis because they may not be exposed enough in terms of the kind of capabilities, the kind of talent that is available in the GCC ecosystem, what other companies are doing. So yes, as a GCC lead, as head of GCC, it becomes my responsibility to ensure that I am mapping my enterprise capabilities, my enterprise needs and my enterprise goals to how I can support them by setting up those enterprise capabilities in my GCCs. So for that, if I have to work with head of analytics, if I have to work with head of biometrics, if I have to work with head of regulatory affairs, yes, there is a lot of internal selling that is involved to these individuals and their functions, and their leaderships because they haven't experienced or they may not have experienced working. And the other thing is, Shankar, it sounds very easy for us because we live this life day in, day out. However, it's very difficult for people who are in the US, Western European countries, because it's a total culture shift for them. They are currently habitual of working with someone sitting right next to them, maybe 10 feet away. And if they have a question, they can walk up to that person and have that question resolved. If now they have to wait for a certain time zone, for a certain person to come online, right? Someone who they have not known for the major, from a professional career perspective. So it's a very different world, a different way of operating for a lot of our colleagues who are on the other side of the table. When I say other side of the table, it's the round table. It's not a square. So we are part of the same team, right? But it's a culture shift for them as well. So yes, for that matter, there is selling required. For that matter, it becomes important for me when I'm as a GCC lead, when I'm thinking about what is my first fundamental pillar of my GCC uh, strategy, and that pillar is capability expansion. How do I bring that outside in perspective? Because if I go and speak with my functional heads for my peers, not that I don't have credibility, but I can go and speak to them that we can do this. But if I take someone from the industry and have them meet with that person, the discussion gets it pivots to a different level altogether. But short answer to your question, yes, there is a lot of selling that is required, especially when it goes to CEO -3, CEO -4, CEO -5 kind of levels.
Divesh, I have a couple of follow questions, right? One you mentioned, there's a culture shift, the other person has to empathize, right? So what do you do to make your sponsor understand, because he has not experienced of creating a GCC, working in a remote culture, right? That's number one. And number two is, for example, you are doing as of now finance operations, right? But now you want to do data analytics. If an Infosys wants to pitch, they will say, hey, we have done this with 100 other companies. We have these many people. We have so many people in sitting in bench. We can execute it like this.
Sure.
How do you pitch when you create something where you don't have a team on it, your own and other things? Probably two questions I asked. Yeah.
Sure. So firstly, before I pitch, me or my teams in the GCCs are already working on something, right? So let's say we are currently working on, uh, I'll take example of software testing, just as an example. We need to ensure that in the current set of work that we have at GCC, what we are delivering, we are demonstrating consistent delivery excellence. And that is demonstrated with metrics showing quality, productivity, reliability that matches or exceeds the global standards. So the first thing is the consistent delivery that of the work that is being delivered out of GCC currently. The second aspect is identifying specific business problems that you can solve, which includes the pain points that may not be very obvious to the headquarters, but that may impact the operations. You start with small pilots when you're talking about the new capabilities, and these pilots these pilot driven expanded responsibilities for before a formal transition sort of started using those discretionary resources to show capabilities in action. I remember when I was working with GSK, we were working on something called as therapy area research. So we used to conduct a lot of competitive intelligence, market research, forecasting, sales forecasting or revenue forecasting kind of activities for the in-market brand functions of GSK. And we were now pitching for their research and development strategic business unit for new work. What we did was at that point in time, we took the team members from our existing teams. We ran certain pilots which we uh, which we believe were relevant to the problems and the pain points of the R&D strategic business unit. We presented that to the board of that particular function of that SBU, and that kind of helped us gain credibility with them. So once you get that initial credibility through these pilots, POCs, the next step for you would be to present a detailed transition plan that minimizes risk to the business continuity, includes knowledge transfer approaches. It should include governance mechanisms, and very importantly, it should also include contingency planning. One of the things that we underestimate is relationship building. it's very important to build relationship with these key stakeholders within the organization, these key decision makers within the organization, through regular engagement, through transparency. So that's those are some of the things that you can do internally. As I said earlier, outside in perspective, it is very important to leverage the success from other GCCs within your industry as benchmarks and proof points. It is important to define a narrative that connects GCC expansion to broader strategic objectives such as digital transformation of market expansion. So, answering your first question, Shankar, and you will have to remind me of the second one, but answering your first question, I think uh, there is there are some of these steps that one can take, as head of GCC leadership, to build new capabilities, expand new capabilities within the GCC.
Got it, Divesh. Actually, technically, you answered the second question also. In the
Okay.
first one, I mentioned about how do you convince for a new capability like a Infosys can go and say that, hey, I can do this new process because I already have people who have been there, done that for XYZ clients, right?
Yeah.
Which you don't have. So that is what my side, but I believe you already answered it, but if not, probably you can answer, no, double click here, Divesh.
I think I've probably covered it, and maybe if I haven't covered something, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is more around, how do we start with a comprehensive business case? It's very important that when we're pitching for new capabilities within a new function, to ensure that we have a very comprehensive business case which sort of highlights both the strategic and operational benefits. So I think I've pretty much covered it, but as we go through the conversation, if there's something that sort of I may have missed upon, I can come back to that.
But I would say if you could give some example. For example, I think in another conversation you mentioned, right? So if you could give an example, hey, in XYZ GCC, may not be with your current or even the past GCC, but even any other GCC, which say they have started this, but then this is how we go and approach for the new work,
Yeah, so
Divish.
that's sort of the example that I alluded to, Shankar, which is, if I go back a few years and talk about my journey with, let's talk about Eli Lilly and Company, right? So when I joined this organization, I inherited a very small team of about what 10 people, which was working upon, like, two of them were working upon revenue forecasting. There were three of them who were working upon anonymized patient level data analytics. Then, there were about five of them who were working upon providing the marketing, the digital marketing content development sort of services. So one, I can talk about the expansion of these services, of these capabilities. But if I have to speak about newer capabilities, what I did was I sort of ran on two tracks parallelly. One track was expanding the footprint of these three capabilities that I already had, that I inherited. And that expansion was done by providing a consistent delivery on an ongoing basis, so that the stakeholders in the mothership, as I would call them, they feel comfortable that yes, our pilot has sort of gotten successful, and we can go, okay, today we are working only for diabetes business unit, with our GCC in India. Why don't we also expand our immuno-oncology business unit? Today we are working only for our North America business unit. Why don't we also start looking at our European, Middle Eastern, African, Japanese? So that's how expansion happens. Your skill set remains the same. You're still delivering the revenue forecasting models as an example, but you have expanded your footprint in terms of the parts of the organization that you're touching. That is the one track that I had, that I ran on in back in 2016, 2017. The other track that I ran on was I would typically invite some of the stakeholders who were not working with my GCC. I would invite them to come over to India. You know, take a take a trip, get a holiday done in India. Just kidding.
Interesting.
But coming over to India, I would then make them touch how other GCCs. So you named Infosys. I would take them to Infosys in terms of how Infosys is working with some of the companies as part of their BOT model for GCCs. I would have them interact with industry leaders from other GCCs, not only from the life sciences space but also from the retail space. I remember we used to interact a lot with Wells Fargo leadership, Target leadership, Swiss Re, sort of a leadership. We used to talk to Indigene. Indigene is a service provider, but then it kind of gave us a very good understanding on number one, what Indigene can do for us if we have to go into a BOT sort of a model for new capabilities. Number two, what it is doing for others, right? So that outside in perspective was very, very important. Now, the other thing that did was, let me take a specific example, sales analytics. All about uh, segmentation, targeting, incentive compensation kind of analytics. If you talk to someone, if you would have spoken to someone in 2016 that I want to start these capabilities, in my GCC, they probably would laugh out because it was a very common capability. Like we had companies like ZS, IMS Health, Extria, Cognizant, Indigene, who would do this left, right, and center. But it took me a while to convince my stakeholders that why don't we put in, these capabilities in India. The reason they were skeptical is not because they did not trust that the GCC can deliver it or not. It was more about because this is very sensitive to run the sales organization. You have a small error made in incentive compensation planning that can sort of impact your entire Salesforce structure. So I put a business case together, which was an end-to-end business case, which is how identifying all those capabilities that we can build, how these projects will be delivered. So who are the people whom we will be, the kind of people that we will be hiring? Which are the kind of activities that we will be delivering? So how we will be delivering those activities, actually presenting them with the actual delivery. I'm talking about the actual methodology, on how incentive compensation project would be developed. And then thereafter going in from, how will we transition work? So Eli Lilly and company used to do a lot of work with ZS at that point in time. So I had a proper transition methodology on how we will transition the existing work from ZS into the GCC, how we will expand. So it was a sort of an end-to-end plan that I had put together. I got this plan approved in mid of 2017, early 2018, and it took me about a year, a year and a half to get this plan approved. And I had to reach out to our global head of marketing, Rob at that point in time, and get his blessings for him to kind of exert that level of influence, to his team members to get that done. So it was a combination of planning, relationship development, outside in perspective, for me to sort of get. So that is a real time example that I can share with you from Eli Lilly and Company.
Phenomenal. No, happy to hear the good stories, Devesh. One of the benchmarks of analyzing the maturity of GCCs on the independence, right? One is what kind of work you do, whether you do cost arbitrage or do R&D, but the another one is whether you as a GCC leader are you independent of taking decisions, right? Or are you still depend upon mothership? Because there are many GCC now I hear they say that there is no GCC concept. It's a one under the one company. We have an office in India, right? I think very very happy to hear. But how do you benchmark about the independence of a GC leaders,
Yeah.
Devesh? I'd like to hear from you.
I think you're referring to this entire decision-making infrastructure, the entire decision-making structures that exist in different GCCs, and you're absolutely right. That how the way the GCC, infrastructure, the way the GCC governance is happening is something which is very critical in terms of defining the maturity of any GCC for that matter. What is the level of autonomy that may be there? So I think it's very important for any GCC, for any organization to address inadequate empowerment, informal governance structures through formalized decision right frameworks that should explicitly define the autonomy parameters for the GCC. So, in other words, uh, it's very important that right from day one, that formal governance structure is established, between the GCC, which is, part of the mothership. Now, for that, it has to be a balanced game. See, it's not about we. I have often come across the conversations whether the GCC function should be reporting into the GCC leaders or GCC leadership, or that should be reporting into the leadership at the in the mothership. I think there are different models based upon the level of maturity. What is important for me as a GCC leader is to number one have that level of governance, which automatically or which will naturally organically get me that level of autonomy that I need for me to be able to operate my GCC operations in an effective way while still ensuring that I'm aligned with the corporate objectives. Number one. Number two, it is important for me as a GCC leader that I help the organization overcome the lack of visibility into the strategic business context, you know, through regular strategic alignment sessions that provide context for the local decisions. Many a times the GCC leaders sort of overlook this aspect of it. There is a there could be I have experienced it as part of different roles that I have played as part of GCC lead. There is a risk averse culture that typically exists in the headquarters, right? And it is for that autonomy to be gained for your GCC. It's important for me as a GCC leader to counter this risk averse culture with number one, measured risk taking opportunities, which are well within the acceptable failure parameters. Number two, by building that trust, even though I have a very limited face time with the global executives, right? And that trust can be built through transparency, through decision making via regular reviews, and ensuring that there are discussions happening on lessons learned, right? Uh, the other aspect about this entire autonomy discussion is also about ensuring that there are concerns that are being addressed about the local team's domain knowledge, and that can be done through leadership development programs by building business acumen and strategic thinking. I think that is very important because the decision making autonomy will come in when the mothership starts to realize that what we have in our GCC is not back office operations. The GCC is part of our business because they understand our business. They have the contextual understanding of what we do, why we do, how we do it, and how the work that is happening in GCC is impacting the global value or the global results. So there are, there is all. I've also worked upon building mechanism for rapid decision making during sensitive times. I have created forums with my counterparts, in the mothership, and these forums are more around sharing our success stories. Especially the success stories that have come in from autonomous decision making for that confidence building that is required. And what I have done in my career, in my journey, is I have gradually increased my decision making threshold as the trust develops and the success is demonstrated. Many a times, the GCC leaders get into the dichotomy of, hey, you've hired me as a GCC head, but you haven't really given me all that autonomy for me to be able to operate. That, in my understanding, that does not come because I have a certain CV, a certain resume that I bring along with me. That comes with trust, that comes with that confidence that builds over the period of time. And by the way, I learned it very hard way. Because I walked into in one of my roles, and this time around I will not name the company, but when I joined this company, I walked in with a mindset that excuse me, I have done it for about 15 years. And if I've done it for 15 years, I can do it with this company as well. And the people in the mothership, they should be listening to me, right? And trust me, I got frustrated in 6 months because they wouldn't listen to me, and they should not listen to me because they don't know me, right? They probably have seen my LinkedIn profile. So it took me a while to be able to build that trust and confidence with them. But once that confidence was built, that autonomy to operate, that freedom to operate automatically came in. It did not come in along with my title. Not because I was a VP and I needed to have a certain degree of autonomy. It came with that trust and confidence that I built.
Interesting, Divesh. Two observation, right? One I say is, in nutshell, I say that you technically need to earn the autonomy rather than demand the autonomy, right? But why the leaders? Because, for example, again, I will relate to another company or anyone saying that, hey, I would go and say that, hey, this is what I already proved. And can you also negotiate during the job profile, or is it's again not, it's not as you say.
Yeah, in my experience, Shankar, see, at the time of when you talk about negotiating at the time of job profiling and interviewing and stuff like that, the evaluation process. See, as part of your evaluation process, you probably are meeting with people who are your hierarchical stakeholders, right? People as a GCC lead whom I would be reporting into, people as a GCC lead, maybe, two or three folks from agencies, for the areas that they are already operating in currently, or for the areas where they may already have plans to expand. The From their perspective, the autonomy comes in. So as I said, there is a certain autonomy that comes along with your title, that comes along with the role that you're playing. But you're not dealing with them on a day-to-day basis, right? Whom you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis are those people minus one, minus two,
Got
right?
it.
These are the people, as I said earlier, they either may not have experienced,
Sure.
on how this model would operate. These are the people who may have that those apprehensions, whether this will work or not. These are the people who are managing teams, and these teams may be fearful of their own job losses, right?
Got it.
These are the people who are driving some of the most strategic, uh, tasks, activities, work types for their organization, and hence they would not want to put that in the jeopardy. So I think uh, while you can negotiate by virtue of your role and title, you know, uh, the real negotiation comes by virtue of trust and confidence that you build on a day-to-day basis. When you're working with someone who's at an associate director, director level, senior director level, right? Those are the people whom you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. So the way you define that governance, the way you constantly and consistently articulate to them on the value that we are creating. We will make mistakes, during the journey. It's not always rosy. And we make more mistakes. We will have more failure stories than the success stories. But as long as those failure stories as part of the GCC life cycle are filled with learning, I think we should be fine.
Sure, nicely put, Devesh. One of the important aspects of again the GCC autonomy is like the procurement team, right? So whether all the GCCs here in India, do they have a separate procurement team in India? I'm sure you will be following the global standards and the processes set by the MNC, which definitely agreeable. But will it help you in moving fast? Because the global, if it goes in the global procurement team, they will have 10,000 things to handle,
Yeah,
and they will definitely prioritize the people who are sitting next to them,
yeah.
right? How does it work again, Devesh?
So I have experienced, even in my current organization, in my current leadership team, I do have a procurement function which is sort of more very focused on the GCCs in India and Philippines. So first answer to your question that yes, in my experience, I've always seen procurement, being part of the GCC operations after a certain point in time. It doesn't come in day one, right? I'm talking about the local procurement. So, see, uh, like any other function, whether we talk about HR, whether we talk about finance, procurement also needs to be fully aligned in terms of the ways of working, in terms of the processes, to the global procurement practices, best practices, policies, and so on. What I have done is that I proposed and implemented a tiered approval system, which was based upon or which is based upon value and risk with increasing autonomy threshold, which is tied to the performance of the local procurement function, right? So it is not about, oh, you know
Okay.
what, since I'm managing India operations or Philippines operations, anything to do with procurement, whether it's, a procurement in terms of finding local partners, for certain kind of services, I will make my own decisions. All these decisions are well within the decision rights that are defined at a global level. However, to make things more agile, to ensure that our centralized processes are not leading to missed opportunities and productivity issues, to ensure that the in-country procurement function has the right level of autonomy, that tiered approval system had been very handy to me. Number one. Number two, I also implemented very robust uh, controls, which are very robust controls and reporting mechanisms, which provide that level of transparency and assurance to headquarter-based procurement functions, right? Uh, we have demonstrated cost savings that are achievable through local vendor relationships. We have had situations wherein our headquarter procurement function would want us to work with a particular service provider because we have a global relationship with them, but not always. And I'll give you an example here. You
Sure.
know, I was working on setting up a new office uh, in Hyderabad for us. And, as part of our global procurement facilities and real estate management function, we already had a partner at a global level. And obviously, I would not name the partners, but, the advice that I received and my procurement director received was that it would be good if we can work with a global partner because they understand our standards, they understand how we operate. We already have our MSAs in place with them, and we may have certain cost efficiencies with them as well since we work them with them on a global level, uh, which is an advice that we took. We the only point that I made was that while I will be working with the global service provider or the vendor that we have, I will also evaluate the local ones. Who understand the local needs. Who are much who can offer us the level of agility that we need. For that. So ultimately, we collectively, me and my global counterparts, we collectively aligned on using a local vendor because we were able to demonstrate that we will be able to achieve our objectives of setting up this new office without necessarily compromising on Signet standard, without necessarily compromising on cost savings or cost efficiencies that we would have got from our global partner. So those are some of the things. The other thing, Shankar, which is very important from a procurement perspective is, it is always good to start with non-critical categories to build that trust and establish that track record before expanding into strategic procurements at a local level. It is important that you develop specialized local procurement expertise, including uh, that knowledge and understanding of regional suppliers and regulations. have the clear guidelines for vendor selection, which again should be matching with the global, with the global standards. Implement the right technology solutions to provide the right visibility. So I'm amazed by myself that I'm able to speak about procurement as much as I did right now in the last 2 or 3 minutes. But to answer your question, any function, including procurement, see, the last thing that we want to do in a GCC operations, whether it's setting up or management, we never want to create or make it look like that there is a separate empire that is being set up, outside of the enterprise. And the moment you start giving out start creating those optics that this is a separate empire altogether, and this empire has a king or a queen, right? That is where the issues start to happen. So anything and everything that we do, we are still doing it for our enterprise organization, right? I keep telling my teams, even in my current role, that we are part of, like, we are Signet. I don't even use the term Signet Health India for my
Correct.
GCC. I use Signet because we are Signet. We just happen to be based in a different country or in a different
Correct.
location.
Correct. No, I think your experience speaks, Devesh, right? So, you had, illustrious, experience with the healthcare and pharma, right? You again already touched upon few things, but would like to double click on what are some specialized functions done by pharma companies in India, right? From the GCC, apart from the horizontal work like data analytics, IT infra, finance accounts, and other things, right? Which are the kind of work, not only I'm saying what your current or the past, but I'm saying overall GCCs, from the healthcare division.
So I think that those boundaries, Shankar, especially in the pharmaceutical life sciences GCCs that I have seen around me, or I have been part of, or I have started, uh, there were times when we used to say that, when we talk about regulatory affairs as a capability, will be centered in India, right?
Okay.
When we would say that a capability around business intelligence would be centered in India, right? I think some of those boundaries have diminished. Now,
Okay.
we do have centers of excellence, right? There are centers of excellence that we have. For example, if I talk about my current organization, our testing center of excellence is in India, right? If I talk about project management center of excellence is in India, right? So if I talk about largely, uh, I see a lot of digital transformation centers of excellence. A lot of GCCs working through those digital, transformation centers of excellence that are being created in their GCC operations in India.
Right.
These centers of excellence. I mean, the digital transformation centers of excellence. I've seen this with Novartis. I'm now seeing it with Eli Lilly outside of my company. I'm seeing this with Merck in Bangalore, big time. I've also observed this with GSK. GSK started, I mean, they've expanded as part of, as part of digital transformation for GSK. If I go outside of pharmaceutical life and life sciences, I've seen this with Kevinu. I've seen this with Helion, which is a sort of a spin-off from GSK. So these, so digital transformation for me is one specialized uh, field where the GCCs are setting up their operations in terms of that center of excellence. The other one for me would be this entire analytics space.
Okay.
So when I talk about analytics, I'm talking about conventional analytics. I'm talking about data engineering. I'm talking about cloud analytics. I'm talking about your data sciences, decision sciences. So a lot of GCCs are investing very, very heavily in these capabilities. The third thing which I may talk about is around biometrics, statistical capabilities. So the pharma GCCs, the life sciences GCCs in India are actually the centers of excellence for these kind of capabilities, which is around biometrics, around statistics. The, the fourth one would be around uh, clinical operations management, right?
Okay.
So these are basically the capabilities which, for example, BMS, uh, Merck, Teva Pharmaceuticals, they have put in India, and they have people who are their clinical operations or the project leadership, members. So a lot of project management, research project management has been put out here in India. So those are some of the ones that I can name, which are the specialized ones, from a pharmaceutical GCC perspective.
Great, Divesh. So when you come to the apart from the horizontal, like whether data analytics or infra management or cloud, I think you can get people from outside healthcare also. But when it comes to healthcare specific domain, how do you get people trained there? Because you may not have skilled people already trained, trained into that particular domain, right? So do you go and start from classroom level training, or how do you go about it,
It
Piyush?
it depends on, so let's take example. See, when we talk about the conventional life sciences capabilities, for example, regulatory affairs, for example, scientific writing, medical writing, health economics and outcomes research, market access. This is our core competency, right? As a pharmaceutical company. And uh, while data analytics, digital transformation, that is not our core competency, conventionally,
Correct.
right? It is
Yeah.
becoming a competency now, but conventionally, I always say this: we have scientists. We did
Correct.
not have data scientists.
Got
So,
it.
so for data scientists, we had to feed into other industries, right?
All right.
But when we talk about the capabilities which are core competency of a pharmaceutical company, for
Right.
that, training and building that capability is much easier for us as compared to the
Okay.
others, right? So if I'm building a regulatory center of excellence, if I'm building a sales analytics center of excellence, the model will be in my mind, it's a very conventional model, and I don't want to complicate it. And, in the quest of coming across someone who knows a lot, I wouldn't use too many jargon. It's simple. We hire laterals to start with, people who come from the peer organizations, right, with significant experience and expertise of delivering these capabilities and of building teams and expanding these capabilities. So they would come in and they would expand either by, so if we talk about the pyramid, either by, so we start from here on the top of the pyramid for the initial capability build. But the feeding is then bottom up when it comes to the expansion of the capability. So yes, in some cases, we start with classroom sort of training, right, in the capability build. So what happens is, the only difference is the the capability, the skills, they remain the same. Whether you're working for Novartis or Eli Lilly and Company or AstraZeneca, or Teva or GSK and so on. What changes is the internal processes. So for these specialized skills, which are very life sciences specific, when we are hiring laterals, we have to focus more in terms of our internal processes and ways of working. When we are hiring freshers to early stage career folks, at that point in time, it will be a combination of the both. I hope I'm answering your question, and this is the
No,
direction that you
absolutely, absolutely, Divesh. Absolutely, bang on. Sorry, I think whether it interfered with other thing. So the other aspect which I like to understand is like now people saying that GCs are really evolved into R&D and no and stuff. So could you give few examples, especially again from the pharmaceutical? What are the real cutting edge work, which even sometime may not be even done in, I think you mentioned about seeding, right? Not even done in HQ, but doing from here. Could you give some inspirational examples, Devesh?
Yeah, so I'll do this without naming the company, because so in one of the GCCs that I worked in, And trust me, people who are listening to this, they will be able to figure out the companies that I'm talking about. uh, I'll talk about some of the examples that I have seen, directly in my experience, and I've been directly exposed to it. An example is that in one of the organizations that I worked with, there was drug development modeling, DDM, as it's called, that was happening outside of India, like in the GCC in India. It's a highly specialized skill set, which typically any pharmaceutical company would keep very close to its headquarters. But this organization, uh, within 1.5 years of its setup, in fact less than that, there was a seed team that was created for DDM, drug development and modeling, and that seed team of two people very soon, got scaled up to about 20, which was across the different therapy areas. When we talk about protein structure modeling, when we talk about the entire 3D modeling from a target identification perspective, that is happening out in India, right? And for me, I don't want to sound like, for me the number of people is not a measure of success. you know when GCCs say that they are 10,000 people, 7,000 people, that is not a metric of success for me. For me,
Okay.
the metric of success is the value that we are driving. Every piece of work is important, but the value that we are driving is the most important piece of it. So and then there is a very significant disruption that is being caused for the enterprise by, with the GCCs, which have, excuse me, developed their entire cloud infrastructure management capability in India. So, again, a Hyderabad-based pharmaceutical GCC has their entire cloud infrastructure, enterprise cloud infrastructure management team based in India. So those are some of the aspects that I have seen. I'm sure there are many more examples outside of the two that I quoted. In the space of AI, in the space of adoption of this entire emerging technologies, which I may not be able to quote as much as you and me would want it to be. But those are the two examples that I can give.
No, definitely, it's inspirational, Divesh. Able to see that you mentioned about your background in the beginning. We are all coming from humble background, but now we have global exposure thanks to a lot of GCC. So I would really kudos to leaders like you able to bring in more job as part of your. You would say, hey, this is my job, but I would say as part of your job, you are getting more exposure to the young people, and changing the landscape, right?
Yeah.
So really kudos. I didn't even realize that we really overshot our time. And I would really love to have one more round of, or even multiple more rounds of, podcast with you, Divesh, in having more questions to you. And no, thanks a million for, joining, as well as even sharing your insights, Divesh, to our audience.
Pleasure is all mine, Shankar. Thank you for having me. Absolutely open to come and have more conversations. I think the best part of these discussions is that when you were asking me certain things, uh, yeah, many things would come naturally because
Correct.
one has lived through that. But what also happens is that you also have to put pressure. Now you ask me examples of the transformation things that are happening. You put pressure on your brain, so it's always good to relive, go back in times and relive some of those memories that you may have left behind. But absolutely a pleasure to come and speak to you about whatever little experience and expertise that I've gained over the last few years. 15, 20 years of my career in terms of GCC operations and within life sciences. If there's anything else that we can speak about, more than happy to come back.
Devesh, not to flatter, in front of the camera, but I say I couldn't really believe when you talked about the procurement, the way you extensively elaborated. It was not a answer of a spontaneous, impromptu answer. Someone who'd been there, lived there, only could give a kind of such a thorough in a structured way. Definitely would love to have more sessions with you in imparting your knowledge into our audience, Devesh. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward. Thank you so much, Shankar. You have a good weekend. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Divesh.
Bye.